Hi, my cat is like walking around because she's hungry again. I was going to go out and do some groceries, but as soon as I stepped out of the building, it started raining so much that I don't feel that need anymore. It's still raining some, I can hear it. Anyhow, I thought I'd talk about some books that are very important to me and are relevant because now in August it's Women in Translations Month. And I have to say, I don't think about what I read during a specific period, except I think for the Mumin books that I read this year. But these three books, I wanted to raise some books that are not written in like English or French, and it's not something that I thought about a lot, because being Swedish, generally most of the books we read are translated except the English ones. I'd say that most Swedish people don't even read English books in English, though I know a lot of people around my age and younger do, especially the ones who read like fantasy and stuff, because they are quite bad at translating those to Swedish. So yeah, but the thing is, we don't talk about translating, we don't raise the questions of who translated this book as much. But yeah, of course, when there's culture news on TV and they're reviewing a new book, they mention the translator, but we don't really know who it is. I know one author, I will mention her, a Swedish one. Her name is Lina Wolf, who does translations and has translated a lot of books that I really love, and one that I didn't love, 100 Years of Solitude. And so yeah, let's get into the book. So one of the books is called, let's see what it's called in English, if it's written in Spanish. The author, I think, is from Mexico. Let's check her out. And it's written by Valeria Luiselli. Okay, so I think I found the English title. Yes. Okay, so it's called Faces in the Crowd in English and De Tyngdlösa in Swedish, and it's written by Valeria Luiselli. And to Swedish it's translated by Anna Kavan. So this book came into my life thanks to that creative writing course. I think it was during the year 1. We were reading a bit and to analyze the books, and I think it just became one of my favorite books quite instantly. It is quite inspired, I would say, from magical realism, but a modern take on it and a female take on it. And so it's about this woman with a husband and 2 children, and she is writing on a book, and throughout this book you see excerpts of the book she's writing on, and her husband comments on it, like, is it really true? Did you experience it? Because is it some type of memoir? We don't really know. And she decides for her publisher to republish some forgotten poets from the 20s poet Gilberto Owen, which is a real poet from where? He's also Mexican, okay. So, but she's kind of calling her publisher, and there are very many layers to this story, I say, because she's also starts being obsessed by Owen and seeing him around, like on the subway, when she's just going about her normal life. And not only him, but also on other 20s poets that I'm not sure, but I think knew him. So, okay, so she now lives in Mexico City, and she thinks about the past when she worked on this publisher in Mexico City. No, New York, definitely New York. Where she knew a lot of creative people, and I would say her life was more chaotic. She was sleeping on other people's couches, and I think bathtubs, and other people were sleeping at her house, and I would say her life was more sexually free, and now she's living sort of a traditional life with a husband and 2 children. And as you can see, I've made a lot of tabs for it because I found it very inspiring. So towards the ending, I say it all starts to fall apart more and more, not in a literal sense, like it's not like she starts fighting with her husband or getting a divorce. It's in a literal meaning, which I found very inspiring how Luiselli did that. It's a lot of talking about the house in itself, and that plays a part of it as the story falls apart. Here's an excerpt from the ending. It doesn't spoil anything, I promise. Excuse me, Mr. Collier. What is it, Owen? Do you have a ghost? Many? What are they? Where do they live? With all respect, dear Owen, what in hell have you got to do with it? So, ghosts are another theme of the book, like the ghost of Owen, the ghost of her own life. You can also see creativity as this sort of haunting, maybe, or how creativity haunts her because it raises her whole life. So yeah, it's one of my favorite books. And now I thought I'd talk about the book that isn't translated to Swedish but to English, and it reminds me in a way of Faces in a Crowd, and it is The Iliac Crest by Christina Rivera Garza, and it was Emmy here on YouTube who talked about it, and like several books here, I just knew I would love it instantly. And it is translated to English from Spanish by Sarah Booker, and she is a Mexican author. I did a review on it on our Instagram, and you will see in the next book. This is quite interesting. In a review here on the back, it's psychological horror story in the vein of David Lynch, who is basically my favorite director, or Ingmar Bergman's Persona, which is basically one of my favorite Ingmar Bergman films, aside from Fanny and Alexander. Really recommend those two ones if you want to get into Swedish cinema or classic cinema. And it's, let's look at my review so I get it correctly. And we have this nameless narrator who is in his home, and he lets this woman into it called Amparo Davila. He notices her hip bones, the iliac crests, and like thinks about how he can't remember what they are called. And in reality he's waiting for this other woman called the Betrayed, and she comes along afterwards, and she's ill. Davila starts taking care of her in his home, and they basically take over his home. And start living there. And while Pero is sitting and writing, she tells her that a man has stolen a manuscript from her, and he works at this hospital, rather a palliative care center or whatever it's called in English. And it turns out that it's connected to the disappearing of her manuscript is connected to a patient there. And it's like it's so weird, and I love the weirdness of it. And I was talking about the connection between that and Faces in the Crowd, and it's that Amparo Davila is a real author who wrote sort of like gothic, weird short stories, I think, also from Mexico, and seems like an author I really want to read her stuff. We also see it in The Most Secret History of Man, but T.C. Elliman is not a living author, although I remember that I read he was inspired by an author from Mali called... So he is inspired by the Mali writer Yamboro Ouologuem, who was was writing during the 60s. So I think we can assume that all of these writers are authors who inspire the books themselves, which is an interesting thing. And because Amparo Davila was a true writer, and they're sort of like pushing him out of his home, and the thing about her missing manuscript. There's an interesting afterword here that talks about like how that talks about the disappearance of Mexican women, and also how Mexican author, how their writings have not been remembered in the same way as male authors, which, yeah, it's not surprising in the world we live in the patriarchy we live in. So yeah, that's the second book. The other book I want to mention, I've already mentioned once on my channel, and it's by Samanta Schweblin, and in Swedish it's called Räddningsavstånd, and in English it was called Fever Dream. She is Argentinian, so it's also written in Spanish, and I'd say it also has the weird aspect. I mean, that I think was how my friend recommended it to me and how I knew it was a book for me. And I'd say the fever dream aspect of it is very true. It is translated to Swedish by, I forgot, Lina Wolf. So, and this one centers around a woman and her daughter moving to a new place, and beside them there lives another woman and her boy, and the main character, she is sitting with her neighbor, a new neighbor, in the car. And so we find out that something horrible has happened with her son. And she says that, I don't want to tell you, I'm afraid that you won't want your daughter to play with him anymore. And yeah, that sort of does happen. She becomes afraid of him, and it is this quote on the backside of the book saying like, it seems like a book written by David Lynch, and yeah, totally. And I would also love David Lynch to film this. I think it would be amazing. So yeah, those are two amazing books from South America, and I'm now moving on to a book from Europe, an author called Unica Zürn, and she has this collection that I have in Swedish, which is two of her books. I sadly have it loaned out to friends, so I can't show it. And the two books are called Dark Spring and The Man of Jasmin. And she's a woman who these two books were written in the 60s and 70s, no, published. And she was suffering from schizophrenia, so had hallucination and that sort of paranoia that is common in that diagnosis, or criteria rather. She was also part of the surrealist movement in Europe. And these two books I found when I lived in London. And I think because I was myself mentally ill at the moment, and that sort of mental illness is a part of this book, and also an obsession is part of this book. Of these books, I found them so fascinating. She writes in a very interesting way. The book that I have is also ended with her anagram poems, which is something that I never read ever in my life before. And yeah, it's a very cool thing. She was also in a relationship with a famous artist called Hans Belmer. He is still sort of celebrated today. And he created this. I think if you're a feminist, you will find his art sort of awful. I always get this like awful feeling in my stomach looking at them, not in a good way. Of these like dolls, like almost human-sized, like bound, and yeah, very creepy. So Google them if you have the capacity. And she was a German author, and she herself was also an artist. So look at that if you want to as well, if you're interested in art. I can't find the collection that I have in the shops, because I bought it secondhand, but I can find it at the library. So let's see who translated it. Helena Eriksson is her name. So yeah, I found so yeah, I find her a very interesting artist that I want more people to read. And if you are a Swedish viewer, and then I want to recommend actually a British artist that I don't found that she's mentioned that much, and I've discovered her at the same time as Zürn, and that is Anna Kavan. I can only find this book right now, and this doesn't exist translated to Swedish, and this is her book Asylum Pieces, which are short stories. But the book I want to recommend is, and I can't find the book in my bookcase right now, but it's called Ice, and it's translated by Disa Törngren, and it's a sort of post-apocalyptic nature book about this man who knows this woman through a friend, and he knows that something has happened to her, and he goes on this hunt to find her again and get back in contact with her, and he searches for her and he sees her, and it's like moving through those like glaciers, and the whole like Earth basically has been enveloped in ice, which is like very dark and apocalyptic, and he can't get to certain places because they have sort of been lost in the ice. And it's a, yeah, like Zürn, she's a very interesting and fascinating author in her own person, but also in her writing. I love the way she writes. I would love if this was translated. This copy is awful, despite it being a famous publishing house. At the time she knew the publisher, Peter Owen. But yeah, so these are 4 authors I would really recommend reading. So yeah, have a good August when it comes to reading translated fictions by women. I know I will.